There is a version of you that nobody ever worries about, not because you are fine, but because you have always been so good at making everything look fine. You walk into a room and people feel lighter. You pick up the phone at 2 in the morning and say, "Tell me everything," without a single trace of hesitation. You hold the weight of other people's falling apart with such steady hands that nobody stops to wonder what your hands feel when they are empty. That is the image. The one you built quietly over years, maybe over a lifetime. You are the one people call when things go wrong. The one who knows what to say. The one who shows up. And there is something beautiful in that. Something genuinely good. You are not wrong for being that person. But tonight, in the quiet, when the last conversation is over and the last person you helped has gone to sleep peacefully while you lie awake, something in you knows. Something in you has always known. That being the white knight is not entirely a choice. It never really was. Take a breath here. Let that land before we move forward. You probably did not decide one day that you would be the strong one. It did not happen like a choice. It happened more like weather, gradually. The way a particular kind of cold settles into a house that has too many open windows. Maybe you grew up in a home where someone's emotions were too big and too unpredictable, and the safest thing you could do was become steady, become calm, become the one who did not add to the chaos. Maybe there was a parent who leaned on you in ways parents are not supposed to lean on their children. Maybe there was a sibling you protected, a friendship where you played therapist before you even knew what a therapist was. Or maybe it was quieter than that. Maybe there was just a consistent low hum of a message being sent to you, not in words, but in reactions. When you helped, people smiled. When you needed something, the energy in the room shifted, and you were smart enough, sensitive enough, to learn the lesson that was never spoken out loud. Your value lives in your usefulness. So you became useful, extraordinarily useful. You learned to read a room before you walked all the way into it. You learned to sense when someone was off before they said a word. You developed what people would call empathy, and it is empathy. It genuinely is. But underneath it, there was also survival. There was a child learning which version of themselves kept the peace. Here is where psychology would name it. What you were doing, without knowing it, was being parentified. You were taking on emotional labor that belonged to the adults around you, or the structures around you, learning that love was something you performed rather than something you received. That safety was something you earned through function. Psychologists call this the fawn response, a lesser discussed cousin of fight, flight, and freeze. Instead of fighting the threat or running from it, you learn to appease it, to be so helpful, so agreeable, so indispensable that no one would ever have a reason to leave you or to hurt you. But pause here, because this does not mean you are broken, not even close. It means you adapted. It means some part of you was brilliant enough to find a way to belong in an environment that did not make belonging easy. That is not a flaw. That is intelligence wearing a costume. The problem is what the costume costs you over time. Take a breath, you are doing well, keep going. Because the pattern does not stay in childhood, it travels with you. It unpacks its bags in every relationship, every workplace, every friendship you form as an adult. And here is where it gets subtle, because on the surface, everything looks fine. Great even. You are dependable. You are loved. You are needed. People speak highly of you. But look at the relationships more closely. Look at who reaches out first, who checks in, who asks how you are doing, and actually waits for the answer. When something falls apart in your life, how many people even know? Because you have become so good at managing your own pain in private, so good at being okay, that the people around you may genuinely not realize there is anything to check on. And then there is the more uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, without meaning to, you choose people who need you. Not consciously, not out of arrogance. But there is a familiar comfort in being the more stable one, the one doing the rescuing, rather than the one needing rescue. Because being needed feels like love. Being useful feels like safety. And when a relationship does not have that quality, when someone is actually whole, and does not need fixing. Sometimes it feels oddly threatening, like you are not sure what you bring to the table, if not your ability to carry theirs. This is where the pattern becomes a prison. What saved you then imprisons you now. You built your identity around being the one who does not break. And so when you do feel broken, when grief comes or failure comes or loneliness comes in that particular 3 a.m. way, you do not know what to do with it. You might minimize it. You might intellectualize it, turning the feeling into an analysis of the feeling, because understanding pain feels safer than feeling it. You might throw yourself into helping someone else because their crisis gives you somewhere useful to put your energy. You might simply go quiet in a way that nobody notices because you have spent so long making sure nobody has to worry about you that even your suffering is polite. And somewhere in all of that, there is a grief that does not have a name yet. The grief of being loved for your function more than your presence. The grief of giving and finding, years later, that you still do not quite trust that anyone would stay if you stopped. The grief of realizing that you have been so fluent in other people's inner worlds for so long that you have become a stranger in your own. I have held everyone's story for so long, I forgot I was allowed to have one of my own. Let that sit. This is the moment in the script that I want to slow down for, because this is the part that does not get said enough. Not in self-help books, not in inspirational videos, not in the conversations you have with other people, because you are always the one asking, not the one telling. You are not a bad person for being this way. You are not codependent in some shameful, irredeemable sense. You are a person who learned early and thoroughly that love had conditions, and you met those conditions so consistently for so long that you started to believe the conditions were love itself. Being the White Knight is not about ego. It is not about needing to be the hero. At its root, it is about terror. The terror that if you put down the armor, if you stop fixing and carrying and showing up for everyone else, you will discover something unbearable. That you are not actually loved, that you are only useful, that without your function, you are somehow less. That is the fear, that quiet, foundational, never spoken out loud fear. What if they only stay because I am needed? And the crueler irony is this: the very behavior meant to secure love ends up preventing it. Because you cannot be truly known by someone if you only ever show them the parts of you that are capable and composed. You cannot be truly loved if love only ever flows one way. Intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires the willingness to be seen without the armor on. But the armor has been on for so long you sometimes forget it is there. Breathe. This is a heavy place to be. You are allowed to feel the weight of it. Now let's talk about what happens in the body, because this pattern is not just emotional, it is physical. White Knights are often high-functioning people who carry chronic, low-grade stress in their nervous system, always alert, always slightly braced for someone else's need. Psychologists describe this as hypervigilance, a state where the nervous system is perpetually scanning for threat or emotional weather, waiting to be needed, waiting to manage something. Over time, this kind of sustained activation takes a toll. It shows up as exhaustion that sleep does not fix. It shows up as a subtle resentment that you feel guilty about, because who are you to be resentful when you chose to help? It shows up as burnout that looks nothing like what burnout is supposed to look like on the outside, because you are still showing up, still functional, still the person everyone depends on. But inside, something is running on fumes. The resentment, by the way, is worth staying with. Not to fan it into bitterness, but to listen to what it is saying. Resentment is almost always a signal that a boundary was crossed that you did not even know you had, or that you knew you had but gave away anyway, because saying no felt too dangerous, too selfish, too much like the moment someone might finally decide you are not worth keeping. Every time I said yes when I meant no, I was teaching people how little I believed my own limits mattered. And so the White Knight, the helper, the fixer, the one who is always there, is often running a quiet, invisible deficit, giving from empty, holding space for everyone else's mess, while their own inner house has rooms they have not opened in years. There is also something worth naming about the role itself. about the White Knight archetype and what it does to your relationships beyond the emotional dynamic. When you position yourself, even unconsciously, as the capable one, as the rescuer, you also inadvertently position the other person as the one who needs rescuing. And that is a power imbalance, even if it comes from a place of love. It can prevent the people you love from developing their own resilience, because you are always there to absorb the impact before it fully reaches them. It can create a dynamic where they feel small or inadequate without realizing why. It can breed a kind of dependency that, when it eventually shifts, leaves both of you disoriented. You can love someone so hard in this way that you accidentally hollow out the space where they were supposed to grow. That is not cruelty. That is not your fault in some punishing sense. But it is worth seeing clearly, because the White Knight does not just affect themselves. The armor radiates outward. Take a slow breath here. Feel where you are in your body right now. So where does this leave you? Not in the place of a solution, because this is not that kind of conversation, but in the place of a question, a real one. What would it feel like to be held instead of doing the holding? Not as a concept, as a physical, actual possibility. What would it feel like to say, I am struggling, without immediately following it with, but I'm fine, don't worry about me? What would it feel like to let someone sit with your discomfort, to not rush to resolve it for their comfort? Because here is what shadow work, the process of looking honestly at the parts of ourselves we do not show in the light, would gently point toward. The White Knight has a shadow, and the shadow is not darkness in the dramatic sense. The shadow is simply the part of you that was never allowed to be small, the part that needed and was told, directly or indirectly, that needing was not safe, the part that was frightened and learned to call that fear protectiveness, the part that was lonely and learned to call that loneliness selflessness. The shadow asks, what do you want? Not what does everyone else need? What do you want? And if you cannot answer that quickly, if the question feels strange or even slightly panic-inducing, that tells you something important. It tells you how long it has been since anyone asked, including yourself. Somewhere between taking care of everyone, I lost the thread back to myself. Inner child work, which is less mystical than it sounds and more like simply listening to younger versions of your own emotional logic, would ask you to find the first moment. The first time you understood that your job was to manage the emotional weather around you. How old were you? What were you wearing? What was happening in the room? And what did you tell yourself, in that very young and very resourceful mind, about what love required? You do not have to revisit that memory with judgment. You do not have to be angry at the people who shaped you, though anger is allowed if it comes. You just have to see it, to acknowledge that a child made a brilliant survival decision, and that you have been living by that child's logic ever since, even though you are no longer in that situation, even though you are no longer that small. The path forward is not about dismantling who you are. Helping is good. Empathy is a gift. The capacity to hold space for others is genuinely rare and genuinely needed in the world. None of that has to go away. What has to change is the belief underneath it. The one that says your worth lives in your function. The one that says rest is indulgent and need is weakness, and being the one who requires help is somehow a failure of character. That belief is not yours. It was handed to you by a situation that needed you to believe it, and you can give it back, not all at once, not in some dramatic act of transformation, but slowly, in small moments, in the choice to say, I'm having a hard week, to someone who loves you, and then to stay in the room while they respond. In the choice to receive care without deflecting it into humor or minimization. In the choice just once to ask for something without apologizing for the asking. Breathe. You are almost through the hardest part. The work of the White Knight is not to hang up the armor forever. It is to learn that the armor is a choice, not a requirement. That it can come off in certain rooms, with certain people, in certain quiet moments. That the version of you underneath, the one without the cape and the composure and the steady, reassuring voice, is not less worthy of love, is not less safe, is in fact the version that has been waiting the longest to be let out. There is a particular kind of loneliness that high-functioning, deeply empathetic people carry. It is not the loneliness of having no one around. It is the loneliness of being surrounded by people who need you and still feeling in some cellular, inarticulate way utterly unknown. You have given so much of yourself outward that the people who love you most may only know the surface, the capable surface, the composed and always there surface. And the lonely, complicated, exhausted interior has been living quietly behind it, waiting for a conversation that was never quite safe enough to start. That interior is not a wound to be managed. It is a person. It is you in the most fundamental sense, the version of you that exists before the helping begins. And the question that this video cannot answer for you, that no video or book or framework can answer, but that only you can sit with, is this: what would it take to let someone know that person? Not the white knight, not the one who carries things, just you, uncertain and capable and frightened and whole all at once, because that is the version that intimacy is actually built from. That is the version that rest feels like. That is the version that does not wake up at 3 a.m. with a quiet, unnameable ache that no amount of other people's gratitude has ever quite touched. Some part of you already knows this. That is why you are watching a video with a title like this one, in the quiet, probably alone, probably after a long day of being the one who held it together for everyone else. You did not click on this by accident. You clicked on it because you are tired in a way that a weekend off cannot fix, because you have been so good at being strong for so long that you have almost forgotten what it felt like before the role began. Because somewhere, underneath the helpfulness and the competence and the steady hands, there is a version of you that simply wants to be asked, "How are you?" by someone who has the full evening to listen. That wanting is not weakness, that is humanity. You are not a service, you are a person, and those two things have never been the same. So let this be the beginning of something, not a transformation, not a new strategy, just a beginning, a small permission, given quietly, in the dark, by no one but yourself, to be complicated, to be tired, to be uncertain, to need things, to exist as a full person, not just a function. The White Knight is a beautiful figure, loyal and brave and steady in a way that genuinely matters. The world needs people who show up, who hold things, who remember that love is a verb. None of that is wrong, but the knight rides alone, always riding towards someone else's crisis, always oriented outward, always in motion. And there is a particular kind of courage, quieter and less celebrated, in finally allowing the horse to stop, in dismounting, in sitting in the grass and letting the armor grow heavy and admitting, to no one in particular or to someone particular, "I am tired. I have been tired. And I would like, just once, to be the one who gets to rest while someone else stands watch." That is not abandonment. That is not selfishness. That is the most honest thing you may have said in years. And maybe the person who hears it, maybe you will surprise yourself with how little the world falls apart when you do. The opening image of this conversation was a version of you that nobody worries about. Not because you are fine, but because you are good at making things look fine. Here is the quiet hope at the end of that image. Someone can worry about you. Someone can hold things for you, imperfectly, with less skill than you would, but with enough love that it counts. Someone can ask and mean it, and you can answer honestly, without softening it, without pivoting to how you're basically okay, without making sure they're comfortable before you're done. You can answer honestly, and the world, for once, will hold you back. That night when the last call is over and the quiet comes back in, let it be a different kind of quiet. Not the hollow one, not the one full of other people's solved problems, while your own remain folded and put away. Let it be the quiet of someone who is learning, slowly and imperfectly, to take up the space they have been giving away for years. The armor was never the real you. The real you is the one who put it on.